You lose someone, and for a while the world doesn't feel real. You keep reaching for your phone to text them. You set 2 coffee cups out of habit. Your brain hasn't caught up with the loss yet. It still expects them to walk through the door. But the real answer for why grief feels this strange is far stranger than you think. Because 100,000 years before therapy, before funerals, before religion as you know it, your ancestors were already grieving in ways that shape the exact wiring in your brain right now. What did they actually do with that pain? And why does it still control you today? Start in a cave, northern Iraq, a place called Shanidar. In the 1950s, archaeologist Ralph Selecki uncovered something that changed how we think about early humans forever. A Neanderthal skeleton buried deliberately, surrounded by clusters of ancient pollen. Some researchers argued this meant flowers were placed on the body. Others pushed back, saying the pollen could have blown in naturally. But here's the detail nobody disputes. The body was arranged with care, not discarded, not left for scavengers, placed. That single choice tells you something enormous. Grief is not a modern invention. Before language had fully formed, before anyone could say the words, "I miss you," something in the human brain already understood that loss required a response. Not just silence, not just moving on. A ritual. Anthropologists have found burial practices dating back over 100,000 years. Bodies curled into fetal positions. Tools placed beside them as if for a journey. Red ochre pigment, the color of blood and life, brushed onto bones long after death. Why would a species, fighting daily for survival, spend precious time decorating a corpse? Because grief, left unspoken, doesn't disappear. It festers. Psychiatrist John Bowlby spent decades studying what happens when connection is severed. His research on attachment showed something ancient humans seemed to already know instinctively. Bonds don't end cleanly. When a child is separated from a caregiver, the body doesn't just feel, it searches. It calls out. It refuses to accept the absence. Bowlby called this protest, and grief, at its core, is protest that has run out of room to move. Your ancestors didn't have grief counselors. What they had was ritual, and ritual gave protest somewhere to go, a body to wash, a grave to dig, a song to sing at nightfall. The task absorbed what the mind couldn't process all at once. Have you ever noticed how funerals still work this way? The flowers, the gathering, the long list of small tasks. None of it undoes the loss, but it gives grief a shape. Here's where it gets stranger. Grief wasn't just personal for early humans, it was communal by necessity. In small hunter-gatherer bands, often no larger than 50 people, every death was a resource crisis. One less hunter, one less caregiver, one less person to keep watch through the night. So the group couldn't simply let one person carry the weight of loss alone. Mourning became shared labor, distributed across the tribe like any other survival task. Modern anthropologist Paul Rosenblatt studied grief across 78 different societies and found something consistent almost everywhere he looked. Cultures rarely expect a grieving person to simply push through alone. There are witnesses, there are helpers, there are people assigned, quite literally, to sit with the pain so it isn't carried in isolation. Now compare that to how you grieve today. You take 3 days off work, if you're lucky. You get a few casseroles. Then everyone expects you to return to normal. Often, within a week, isolation has replaced the tribe, and your nervous system, still running ancient software, doesn't know what to do with that silence. This is the counterintuitive twist. Grief didn't evolve to be processed quietly, alone, in private. It evolved to be witnessed. Loudly, physically, publicly, wailing rituals existed across nearly every ancient culture archaeologists have studied, from early Mesopotamia to prehistoric burial sites in Africa. Crying out wasn't weakness. It was a signal, calling the tribe closer at the exact moment a person needed them most. When you swallow grief today, quietly, alone at your desk, some part of your brain is still waiting for a response that modern life rarely gives. Researcher George Bonanno, who has spent over 25 years studying how humans respond to loss, found something that surprised even him. Most people are more resilient after loss than psychology once assumed. Grief doesn't always follow neat stages. It comes in waves, sometimes contradictory ones. Laughter and devastation in the same afternoon. That's not a malfunction. That's the same flexible system your ancestors relied on to survive, again and again in a world where death was constant. Disease, childbirth, predators. Early humans faced loss so often that a rigid grieving process would have been unsustainable. So the brain adapted a different strategy entirely. Grieve in bursts, function in between, repeat as needed. Which brings you back to that cave in Shanidar, that careful, deliberate burial, tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote the word grief down. It wasn't sentimentality, it was survival wisdom, encoded into behavior long before it could be encoded into language. A tribe that mourned together stayed together. A tribe that ignored death entirely, that treated loss as something to simply move past, risked losing its own cohesion when it needed unity the most. So when you feel the pull to talk about someone you've lost, to say their name out loud, to sit with someone rather than push through alone, that isn't oversensitivity. That's 100,000 years of tested strategy, quietly asking to be used the way it was designed. Tonight, you might set out 2 coffee cups out of habit again. You might reach for your phone to text someone who can't answer. And for a moment, it will feel like your brain is broken. It isn't. It's ancient. It's the same brain that once buried a body in a cave and pressed red ochre into bone, refusing to let loss pass in silence. Your ancestors already knew what modern life sometimes forgets. Grief was never meant to be carried alone in a quiet room. It was meant to be witnessed, spoken, shared, until the weight became bearable enough to set back down.